"Nobody move or I swear I'll start shooting." The shout tore through the quiet bus station like a lightning strike. Mothers screamed. A baby wailed. A janitor dropped his broom with a clang. But Daniel Brooks didn't flinch. While others ducked or froze, he was already calculating. His eyes locked on the trembling gun, the man's unsteady stance, the fear in Eli's face. His hand reached into a nearby backpack. The man with the gun never saw it coming. 1 second, he was screaming at a teenage boy with a pistol in hand. Then the mirror flashed, and Daniel Brooks, the quiet bus driver, moved like lightning. In less than 3 seconds, the gun was on the ground. The threat was neutralized. And everyone in that sleepy station realized they had no idea who this man really was. Daniel Brooks didn't stand out, not in the way people usually notice. He was the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second thought. His light blue uniform, slightly faded at the shoulders, marked him as the town's morning bus driver. Always on time, always polite. He wore a plain navy cap pulled just low enough to shade his eyes, and his posture carried that quiet, squared strength of a man who had spent his life walking with purpose, even if no one remembered why. To the people of Hadenfield, he was just Dan, the guy who drove the 715 every day, rain or shine, the guy who knew the names of your kids, the shortcut around Main Street construction, and how to restart a stalled engine without calling for backup. He moved like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, and most folks assumed he never had. But underneath that quiet exterior, Daniel Brooks carried more than just passengers. He carried memory, discipline, ghosts. His apartment above the laundromat overlooked the corner gas station. Nothing fancy, just a small space with faded drapes and a shelf lined with books on mechanics, history, and a single frame photo of 3 generations of Brooks men in uniform. His grandfather had fought in Korea. His father died in Desert Storm. Daniel had gone to Afghanistan. But no one in Hadenfield asked, and Daniel didn't offer. He liked the quiet. That's what the town gave him. Every weekend, Daniel would arrive at the depot a little early, sipping bitter diner coffee as he ran his maintenance checks. That's usually when Eli Morgan would show up, barely 17, mop-haired and always talking. Eli swept floors for the station and treated every commuter like a long-lost friend. He called Daniel Mr. Brooks at first, then dropped the title after Daniel told him to keep it simple. "You ever serve, Mr. B? I served breakfast on Sundays once. That count? Come on, you move like one of those guys, like you know stuff." "Everyone knows stuff, kid. It's what you do with it that matters." Eli had that energy, raw, unshaped, still believing the world could be changed with a big heart and bigger effort. And Daniel, for all his silence, had a soft spot for the kid. He reminded him of younger versions of himself, back before the sand, the noise, the weight. They didn't talk much, but Eli's presence chipped away at the wall Daniel had built around his past. On good days, they'd share bad jokes and greasy diner biscuits. On bad days, Daniel would just grunt in reply, and Eli, with surprising wisdom, would let the silence be enough. In a town like Hadenfield, quiet was a virtue. People trusted those who didn't ask too many questions. Daniel Brooks thrived in that space, half visible, half forgotten. But as the world would soon learn, some men disappear into the background not because they're small, but because they're trained to watch everything. The town of Hadenfield didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. It was the kind of place where you could still leave your car unlocked, where folks waved even if they didn't know your name, and where time felt like it had hit the brakes sometime around 1993. The heart of town pulsed quietly along Main Street, a strip lined with brick buildings that leaned slightly with age and memory. Tucked between Murphy's Diner and Henderson's Hardware was the bus station. It wasn't much, just a squat brick building with faded signage, 2 wooden benches out front, and a vending machine that hadn't worked since Bill Clinton was president. Inside, the floor was scuffed tile, the kind you only saw in government buildings or schools built before Wi-Fi existed. A bulletin board hung near the entrance, cluttered with flyers for church bake sales, lost cats, and handwritten notes advertising lawn service. That Monday morning rolled in slow, wrapped in golden light and the smell of overbrewed diner coffee drifting through the station vents. Life in Hadenfield moved like honey, thick, sweet, and unhurried. Sandra Lewis sat near the front window, gently bouncing her infant daughter on her knee. She looked exhausted in the way only new mothers do, part love, part caffeine, and part prayer that the baby would stay asleep just 5 more minutes. She scrolled through her phone with one hand, her eyes darting between the screen and her child. Her diaper bag sat at her feet, half unzipped, a baby bottle barely peeking out. A few seats down, two older gentlemen, Mr. Halverson and Mr. Deeks, were locked in what had clearly become a lifelong argument about baseball. The '86 Mets had the best bullpen in history, and you know it. That's because you've never watched a full Reds game sober in your life. Their voices rose and fell like a familiar tide, drawing no attention from the others in the station, who had heard it all before. A couple of commuters stood silently, clutching travel mugs and checking their watches like it might make time move faster. And then there was Daniel Brooks, leaning beside his bus, clipboard in hand, checking his manifest like always. But his eyes weren't on the paper. They were scanning, watching, measuring. He'd learned to count exits without thinking. Learned to memorize faces with just a glance. Learned that quiet didn't always mean safe. Years of training didn't fade. It just learned to stay still. That's when he saw the van, parked just across the street, matte gray, tinted windows that were too dark for state regs, engine off, two men sitting inside, not talking, not moving. Daniel's breath caught, not in panic, but recognition. There was something in the stillness, something unnatural. He'd seen that posture before, not on this street, but on others like it, in cities shattered by war, in villages scarred by tension. That stillness always came just before the chaos. He didn't move, didn't shout. He just tapped the edge of his clipboard, rhythmically, matching the beat of his quickening heart. Inside the station, Sandra hummed softly to her daughter. The old men continued to argue batting averages, and the janitor, young Eli Morgan, swept the same corner for the third time, lost in a daydream. None of them saw what Daniel saw. None of them felt the shift. But Daniel Brooks had learned to listen to silence, and that silence had just changed. Daniel Brooks had trained himself not to look back. But sometimes the mind doesn't ask for permission. A sound, a movement, even the way sunlight hits the ground just right. Any of it could open a door in his memory that he thought was locked tight. That morning, as he watched the gray van across the street from the bus station, one of those doors creaked open, and suddenly he was no longer standing on Main Street in Hadenfield. He was back in Afghanistan. The air was dry, the sun was brutal, and the silence was never really silent. Sand crunched beneath his boots, and the wind carried more than dust. It carried threat. The ridgelines, the rooftops, the shadow behind a window, any of them could hide death. And Daniel had to see it before it saw him. He remembered lying prone behind a crumbled stone wall in a village whose name he never learned. His scope was steady. His heartbeat was not. Sergeant Dunn's voice crackled in his earpiece. Brooks, never look for the threat. Look for the thing that doesn't fit. Shadows don't move. People do. Trust your gut before your training, and your training before your fear. Daniel had carried that voice with him ever since. Even now, years later, he could still hear Dunn's sharp tone. Half anger, half armor. The man had taught him everything. How to wait, how to breathe, how to make a single decision that would mean life or death. He'd also taught him how to live with those decisions. But Daniel's story hadn't started in the desert. It started decades earlier, in a small farmhouse with creaking floors and a flag folded in a wooden case above the fireplace. His grandfather, Walter Brooks, had fought in Korea and again in Vietnam. A quiet man, tough as rusted nails, who carried a sense of duty like most men carried their wallets. Close, worn, and always there. Daniel remembered watching Walter polish his boots every Sunday, even after retirement, as if staying ready was just part of being alive. His father, Jonathan Brooks, never got the same chance to grow old. He served in Desert Storm and never came home. A roadside IED changed the trajectory of their family forever. Daniel was only 10 at the time, but he remembered the way his mother cried in the kitchen, silently over the sink, as if making noise would make it worse. By the time Daniel enlisted, it wasn't out of obligation. It was in his blood. 3 generations of soldiers, 3 sets of boots in 3 different sands. And when it came his turn, he didn't hesitate. Not because he loved war, but because he understood sacrifice. Standing outside that bus station in Hadenfield, watching the van, Daniel felt all of it return. His grandfather's discipline, his father's silence, Sergeant Dunn's words. You don't stop being a protector just because you hang up the uniform. He hadn't worn the Army green in over a decade, but the training, the instincts, the readiness, they never left. They just waited for the moment he'd need them again. And Daniel Brooks had the feeling that moment was coming fast. The moment shattered the morning like glass. The bus station's double doors slammed open with a violent clang, sending a gust of cold air and tension slicing through the sleepy calm. All at once, the quiet rhythm of Hadenfield life stopped. Nobody move, or I swear I'll start shooting. The voice was hoarse, cracked by desperation, and far too loud for the small space. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Sandra Lewis instinctively cradled her baby tighter to her chest. Mr. Halverson and Mr. Deeks, who'd been arguing about batting averages seconds earlier, now sat stock still, mouths open, eyes wide with disbelief. At the center of the chaos stood a gaunt man in his late 30s, dressed in a stained hoodie and jeans, a pistol shaking in his hand. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, wide with fear and something else. The twitchy, dangerous glaze of someone not entirely in control. Hands where I can see them! Empty your pockets! Now! His voice cracked again, teetering between panic and rage. Young Eli Morgan dropped his broom with a loud clatter. The metal handle bounced against the tile, echoing across the room like a shot. The gunman flinched and swung the weapon toward the sound, locking eyes on Eli, who stood frozen in fear. Everyone in the room reacted like civilians do in a crisis. Sudden, chaotic motion, followed by stillness and stunned silence. Everyone except Daniel Brooks. Daniel didn't panic. He didn't shout, didn't rush in. He did what he had been trained to do decades ago. He observed, calculated, and prepared to act. His breath slowed, not from calm, but from training. From thousands of hours on the battlefield where reaction time was life or death. His eyes scanned the gunman's posture. Weak grip, index finger too tight on the trigger, feet too close together. The way he held the gun betrayed nerves and inexperience, but that made him more dangerous, not less. Daniel's peripheral vision mapped the room. Benches for cover, entry points, reflective surfaces, exit lines. His focus settled on a dropped backpack lying just feet away. Eli's. He moved slowly, crouching behind a bench, keeping low, never drawing attention. His body followed muscle memory, long ingrained. His hand slipped quietly into the open flap of the backpack, rifling past notebooks and snack wrappers until it found something small and unexpected. A compact mirror. It was scratched and smudged, the kind teenagers used to check their hair. But in that moment, it was enough. He glanced up, noting the angle of sunlight pouring through the station's east-facing windows. Timing would be everything. Hey, kid! I said move! The gunman's voice was ragged now, full of frayed nerves. The barrel of his pistol swung again toward Eli. A boy too young to know what to do, too scared to run. And that's when Daniel struck. The mirror caught the sun at just the right angle. A sudden flash of blinding light bounced across the room, catching the gunman square in the eyes. He squinted, cursed, raised an arm instinctively. And that was the opening. Daniel exploded from behind the bench in a blur of movement. His left hand smacked the pistol upward, sending it flying across the floor with a metallic clatter. His right hand grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting it behind the man's back in one smooth, practiced motion. The gunman buckled under the pressure, stumbling to his knees, dazed, disarmed, and overwhelmed. The entire station froze. Sandra was crying quietly, still shielding her baby. The two old men sat wide-eyed and speechless. Eli gasped but didn't move. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He just tightened his grip and whispered, "It's over. Don't move." He nudged the weapon farther out of reach with his boot, never letting go of the man's wrist. The threat was neutralized, just like that. For a long beat, there was no sound but the collective breath of a room that had just remembered how to breathe again. And in that stillness, in the dusty golden light of a quiet morning, torn apart by violence and mended by precision. Everyone in that bus station looked at Daniel Brooks for the first time and realized they had never truly seen him before. There's something different about the way a trained soldier faces a crisis. It's not just courage, it's control, the ability to quiet the storm inside long enough to read the wind outside. When danger explodes into a civilian space, most people react with panic, confusion, or paralysis. But for someone like Daniel Brooks, the moment doesn't spark fear. It activates memory. Years of repetition, of drills in the desert, of orders barked under pressure, they resurface like muscle memory. A soldier doesn't have to remember what to do. His body already knows. That's the thing about military training. It doesn't vanish when the uniform comes off. It doesn't leave with the last deployment or disappear after the discharge papers are signed. It goes silent. It sleeps, but it never dies. Daniel didn't run toward the gunman because he was fearless. He moved because he had trained for that exact moment in 100 different scenarios. And while the world around him fell into chaos, his mind narrowed into clarity. It's a trait that separates those who've seen real conflict from those who've only imagined it. But it comes at a cost. Living with that kind of training means always scanning, always anticipating, never fully resting. It's the weight veterans carry quietly, the readiness that never really turns off. And in moments like the one at that bus station, it becomes clear. Training like that wasn't meant to fade. It was meant to wait for the moment when someone had to stand between chaos and the innocent. Daniel Brooks didn't become a hero that morning. He simply remembered who he had always been. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the small station like waves breaking on a forgotten shore. Squad cars rolled in with urgency, brakes screeching, radios crackling. Officers rushed toward the doors, hands on their holsters, expecting the worst. But inside, the crisis was already over. The gunman lay face down, disarmed, with his wrists pinned behind his back by a pair of zip ties Daniel had improvised from a maintenance kit under the bench. His pistol, the one he'd waved around only moments ago, now rested safely under the same bench, slide locked open, harmless. Daniel Brooks stood nearby, breathing steady. His shoulders were relaxed, but his eyes remained sharp, always scanning, always calculating. The first officer through the door, a younger man, barely 30, barked, "Where's the shooter?" Daniel simply nodded at the man on the floor. "There. He's done. You're safe to approach." The officer blinked, thrown off by how calm the voice was. No panic, no adrenaline tremble, just a quiet authority. Another officer, older and broader, crouched beside the restrained man, checked the zip ties, then looked up at Daniel. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel shrugged. "Just a bus driver." The older officer narrowed his eyes. "Not with those moves, you're not." After confirming the weapon was secure, both officers stepped aside and waved in the paramedics, who moved quickly to check Sandra Lewis and her baby, then Eli, who was still shaken but unharmed. The older officer returned to Daniel. "You military?" Daniel gave a slow nod. 101st Airborne, retired, sniper qualified. That gave the man pause. He offered a small nod. Not one of surprise, but of recognition. He knew the type. He may have once been the type. "You acted fast, saved lives. Just did what I was trained to do." That's what they all say, but you kept your head when most folks freeze. By then, the crowd outside had grown. Curious neighbors, local press, even a few kids who'd skipped school for the excitement. Whispers passed through the onlookers like wind through tall grass. "Did you hear? The bus driver took him down. He disarmed the guy himself. Used a mirror or something, like in a movie." A local news reporter pushed through the tape line with a cameraman in tow. She raised her mic as she approached Daniel. Sir, we're hearing you're the man who stopped the shooter. Can we get a comment? Are you a hero?" Daniel turned to her, exhaustion flickering behind his eyes. "I'm not a hero. I just remembered what I was taught. That's all. But you saved people. So would anyone else with the right training. The heroes are the ones who never got to come home. I'm just one of the lucky ones." The reporter seemed taken aback, unsure how to respond. Daniel didn't wait for her to find the words. He turned and walked toward his bus. Eli followed him, his steps still unsure. Mr. Brooke, that was amazing. I mean, I've seen action movies, but what you did was real. Daniel glanced over at him with a tired half-smile. Movies are flashy. Real life's just about doing the hard thing when it has to be done. You really don't want the cameras? Kid, I've had enough spotlights for one lifetime. I like the driver's seat better. It's quiet, predictable. He climbed onto the bus, paused at the top step, then looked back. You coming? This town still needs its 7:15. And just like that, Daniel Brooks returned to his route, not for glory, not for recognition, but because that's what he did. He got people where they needed to go, safely, silently, like he always had. The sun had started its slow descent over Hadenfield, casting long golden streaks across the pavement outside the station. The crowd had mostly dispersed, the flashing lights now gone, leaving behind only questions, and a quiet sense that something profound had happened. Eli Morgan found Daniel Brooks sitting on the station steps, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos. For once, the usually talkative teen was quiet. He sat beside Daniel, the silence between them oddly comfortable. After a long pause, Eli spoke. So, you were really in the military? Daniel nodded slowly. I was. Army, 101st Airborne, served in Afghanistan and Iraq. Sniper? Eli asked, his voice low, like the word itself carried weight. Another nod. But you never told anyone. Daniel stared straight ahead at the empty parking lot, his eyes following a pair of birds dancing between power lines. Didn't seem necessary. I didn't come home looking for a round of applause. I came back looking for peace. Eli leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But you could have done anything. Security, private contracts, even been on the news after today. Why drive a bus? Daniel gave a quiet laugh, more breath than sound. You ever see the look on someone's face when you help them get where they need to go? Sometimes it's a kid on his first job interview. Sometimes it's a tired nurse going home after the night shift. Sometimes it's a mom rocking her baby, hoping it doesn't cry too loud. That's why, he turned to Eli. After war, I didn't need noise. I needed purpose. Something simple. Something steady. Eli was quiet for a moment, then asked, was it in your family, like military stuff? Daniel nodded again, this time with something deeper in his expression. Yeah, my great-grandfather fought in World War II. My grandfather Walter did 2 tours, Korea and Vietnam. My dad served in Desert Storm. He didn't make it back. That's heavy. It is. But it's also legacy, not the kind people brag about. The kind you carry. He paused, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. They all serve so I could live in a country where choosing peace is still a choice. Eli looked at him differently now. Not like a bus driver, but like something more. A link in a long chain of quiet men who had done loud things when the moment called for it. You think I could ever do something like that? Eli asked, eyes wide with possibility. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at the boy, saw the questions behind the confidence, the fear beneath the surface. He saw himself. Maybe. But you don't start by trying to be a hero. You start by showing up, by listening, by choosing to protect people, however you can. They sat there a little longer, just 2 generations, sharing a silence made of understanding. And in that moment, Daniel Brooks realized something. His legacy didn't need a uniform anymore. It just needed someone else willing to carry it forward. 6 months later, the leaves in Hadenfield had begun to turn. Deep reds and fading golds danced across the sidewalks with each passing breeze. The bus station was quieter than usual that morning, the 7:15 humming softly by the curb. And Daniel Brooks stood beside it with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the figure approaching him. Eli Morgan had cut his hair short. He stood taller now, straighter, dressed in army green with a fresh duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His youthful energy was still there, but tempered now with focus. Discipline, purpose. I guess this is it, Eli said, offering a sheepish smile. Daniel nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. You ready? Honestly? No, but I want to be. That's enough. There was a pause between them. The kind of silence that said more than any words. Then Eli added, his voice quieter, "I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for you." Daniel looked at him, really looked at him. "You're doing it for the right reasons?" "Yeah, I want to help people. Not chase medals, just do something that matters." Daniel placed a firm hand on the young man's shoulder. "Then you're already ahead of where I was when I started." They shook hands, not the casual kind, but the kind that meant something. A passing of weight, of history, of quiet legacy. As the army transport pulled up, Eli turned one last time. "You ever think about teaching? You've got a lot more to give." Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Driving's enough for me. Gets people home. That's still service in my book." Eli boarded the van, and Daniel watched until it disappeared around the bend. Yes, that evening, Daniel sat in his apartment, the soft hum of the radiator ticking in the background. The television was off. The world outside continued like always. Couples walking dogs, porch lights flicking on, the clatter of someone bringing in their trash bins. But inside, something had shifted. Above his old writing desk, Daniel had finally hung two frames. One held the Bronze Star his grandfather Walter had earned in Vietnam. The other held his own Commendation Medal from Afghanistan. Still polished, though Daniel had kept it in a drawer for years. They weren't hung for show. There was no spotlight on them, just soft, ambient light from a nearby lamp. They were reminders of legacy, of sacrifice, of men who had quietly stood their ground when the world needed it most. Beside the medals was a stack of envelopes, dozens of handwritten letters from veterans across the country. Some were simple. "Thank you. I saw what you did. You reminded me of who we are." Others were more personal. "I've driven trucks for 20 years since I got back. Thought I was the only one still carrying it all. You helped me feel seen." Daniel had read everyone, carefully, respectfully, and when he finished, he kept them in a box lined with the American flag his father had received at Walter's funeral. It was in those quiet moments, when the noise faded and the spotlight had long since turned away, that Daniel Brooks found peace. He realized something he'd never quite understood in uniform. Service wasn't about how loud you shouted or how many medals you earned. It wasn't about parades or promotions. It was about doing the hard thing quietly, over and over, when no one was looking. Sometimes with a rifle, sometimes with a steering wheel, sometimes with a mirror and a single decision. Daniel Brooks had served in war, but now in a sleepy town called Hadenfield, he served in peace. And in his own quiet way, he knew that might be the greatest mission of all. In a world that often celebrates noise, it's easy to overlook the quiet ones. Daniel Brooks never asked for attention. He didn't wear his past on his sleeve, didn't tell stories about combat, and never once called himself a hero. And yet, when the moment came, when lives hung in the balance, it was his silence, his focus, and his steady hands that made all the difference. There's a powerful lesson in that, especially in today's America. We live in a time of constant headlines, viral videos, and voices shouting to be heard. But maybe, just maybe, what we need more of are people like Daniel. People who don't need the spotlight to do what's right. People who serve quietly, protect others without fanfare, and carry their strength not in their words but in their actions. Think about your own community. How many Daniels do you pass each day without knowing? The elderly man walking his dog, the woman ringing up groceries with a slight limp, the neighbor who always checks on others during storms. Some of them may be carrying decades of service, sacrifice, and training, and you'd never know. That's the beauty and the burden of quiet legacy. So let's bring this story home. Have you ever met someone like Daniel? A hidden hero? Maybe a veteran, a teacher, a parent, or someone who shaped your life in quiet but powerful ways? Tell us about them in the comments. We'd love to honor their story. And if Daniel's story reminded you that quiet service still matters, that doing the right thing doesn't always come with applause, then go ahead and give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories that highlight the strength, grace, and courage often hidden in plain sight. Because in the end, it's not the medals or the headlines that shape our world. It's the everyday choices, the silent guardians, and the Daniels among us. Thank you for watching. Take care of each other, and never forget to look twice. You never know who's standing beside you.